Well, hello there again. I am in the shop today instead of in the van because I'm doing a project working on a pair of shears that one of my sharpening friends had sent to me. They needed a little bit of extra work because there were quite a few things that were done wrong on the shear by the previous sharpener, and this sharpener just wasn't comfortable trying to get the work done on this shear and do it correctly. Really, all I'm going to be doing in order to be able to correct this in particular is I'm going to be dealing with this very heavy swoop that's on the inside early entry of the shear. I don't know how well you can see that. You can see it some cut in right here. You can see it here where it swoops down. Really what I need to do is I need to clean this up and then realign the edge radius of this shear to correct the sharpening that was done before I can actually fully reconvex this, because this is also bull-nosed along the edge. It's too pointed at the tip. And of course there's also issues on the inside of the shear as far as the ride line work is concerned, but we'll straighten that out the best that we can as well as we go through the process. There was also a good bit of chewiness on the blade itself, and there was actually some, I'm not sure if it was chemicals or some other form of trash that was on the inside of the shear that I cleaned up with one of my solvents here. Just to remove that, and that actually smoothed the shear up, although there is a nick at the tip because apparently at some point it was dropped as well. So there's quite a bit that we're going to have to do to this shear. I'm going to walk you through as much of the process as possible, showing you how I correct this and how to do it with multiple kinds of machines. I'm also going to use one special tool that I have that I had made for myself, and there's other tools that are available as well and that you would be able to use for that to fix any kind of a problem that you have with a shear like this. Before we get started on this though, I wanted to say a very special thank you to Above Shears for sponsoring this video. If you're ever interested in a wonderful line of shears that you can sell to both your stylists and your groomers, these people really stand behind the materials that they do. They really make sure that they're on top of the quality of the shears that they bring in to the States, and also they give a lot of support as well as far as helping you to understand how to sell them and sell them easily to your customers. If you choose to go the route of Above Shears, the customers will be very, very satisfied. It's a line that I've sold myself, and all of the customers that have purchased have been very pleased. Alex Lee is the name of my main contact there, and he would be a wonderful guy to get in touch with in order to be able to ask any questions. I will have some contact information below underneath the video if you're interested in looking into that. Also, during this, I have a diamond plate that I'm going to use for some of the materials here. And Alex does make some diamond plates as well. They're a CBN plate though instead of a diamond plate like mine. I tried diamond because I wanted to try something different than the CBN plates that were out there. It works, but not as well as I wanted it to, and you'll see that in the video as well as to why. But I did keep it for dealing with situations just like this because it allows me to be able to do a nice crisp edge on the inside of the shear when I'm doing the convexing, and that actually makes things a whole lot easier to be able to dress up than trying to do it on the papers. The problem with the papers is often it's very hard to get a nice square cut into the shear after it's been rounded out severely like this. So let's see what we can do with this. Alright, to start this process today I'm working on the Heritu, which is one of the units that I sell. I'm going to go ahead and check the angle on this and see where the shear is at, although honestly I think I'm just going to go ahead and make it a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp the blade into the fixture that I'm using here. And I'm going to use a fixture in this case. I know that in a lot of the videos you've seen that I do a lot of work freehand, but in this case I'm working on a diamond plate, which is very similar to a CBN plate. One of the problems with a diamond plate versus a CBN plate is the diamond plates tend to want to load. But I did want to try it just to see. And as far as the grit is concerned on this, it's about an 800 grit wheel. So I like how it cuts, I just don't like how it loads. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with the part of the shear that is actually swooped down. And I'm actually going to square that out against the early part of the early entry of the shear. So I'm just going to start off by doing just a light touch, moving forward until I bump. I'm going to start to cut that down, and I'm going to do some convexing. And I'm going to do the same thing again until I square that out. Now I'm going to take a look and see how this is cutting. It's going to be a little difficult to see in the video, but all I'm doing is I'm making sure that I'm removing some material and basically bringing the shear back to where there's not this curve to the cut, and then almost like on a knife, a reverse bow back into the throat of the shear. I need to at least bring the lower part of the back side of where that cutting area is in line with the start of the shear, about, I'd say maybe a ½ inch or so to 3/8 of an inch out from that inside shoulder, and then straighten that out in order to get the shear to look proper on the outside of the shear. So again, I'm going to cut that in and rotate. Here I'm doing the convexing. I'm edging in and convexing, edging in and convexing until I start to see a burr is forming. I'm going to go ahead and take a look, and we'll continue this process until I'm able to reconvex the throat of this shear. Alright, now that I've finished the step that I was trying to accomplish, where I actually took the blade and you can see I dropped it down at the shoulder right here, that is going to allow me to align the remainder of the blade in, and I'm going to sharpen the rest of the blade up with a normal 30 micron. Just the blade itself is just in rough shape, so it just needs a normal sharpening from this point on. But that diamond plate did allow me to get a nice crisp cut into that early entry of the shear. So I'm going to work back and forth now and start bringing up a burr. I make a few passes and then I do some convexing to round over that front surface. I do it both progressively and I do it just a regular normal convex. I'm going to continue until I work that burr across the entire blade. So in the process of this, I actually decided to forego the 30 for the moment because there ended up being a lot more work on the front of the shear than I really realized that there was going to have to be done in order to be able to get rid of that bull nose. I switched to an 80 micron sheet, and now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a 60 micron and continue with what I was doing. I'm going to pull the shear out for the moment, set this down, pull this off, and switch this out for a 60 micron. The nice thing about having different micron discs and different grit sizes is it allows you to be able to do certain work faster. A lot of times a 30, a 15, and a 9 is really all that you're going to need for most normal sharpening. But if you run into a situation where you have to do a lot of work on a shear, then having something like the 60 and the 80 micron can really help speed the process up quite a bit. There's other tricks that you can do in order to be able to alleviate that and then just go straight to a 30, but having these additional discs is relatively inexpensive and it's actually going to save you a lot of time in the long run. At this point, all I'm doing is I'm just making sure that I bring up the burr with the 60. I started towards the edge with the 80 and didn't bring it all the way in, so I'm going to bring it the rest of the way up with the 60, so I have a little bit finer burr, although a 60 burr is very coarse, so I'm going to want to make sure I take care of that before I move on to the 30, the 15, and the 9. So I'm just checking the process that I made on the front of the shear as I flip that around and take a look. All I want to do is make sure that I'm removing the majority of the surface scratches that I created with the 80 micron disc. That's taking care of the majority of them, and anything else I'll take care of with the 30 and the 15 and then the 9 as I step this down. Alright, so now that I've finished my work with the 60 micron, let's see if we can see the burr that I created. I pulled some of it up with my finger. You can actually see that it's actually a very coarse burr. You can see it here and there on the blade. If I pull my finger back this way, you can actually see I can pull it forward and backwards, but you can see that very rough looking edge. And that's mainly the burr that's there. It's still on that inside edge some, and I actually want to pull that back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my Waterstone. And in this particular case, because it's such a coarse burr, I'm actually going to hang the edge over the front of the Waterstone and just do one pull back to help pull those burrs off some. Then I'm going to flip-flop those burrs off. The reason that I want to do that is I want to make sure that I'm removing as much of the burr as possible, but I also don't want to embed these coarser burrs into my stone. So I'm just going to go ahead and wipe this down, flip-flop any burr that might be left over, make sure that I've removed the burr from the inside of the shear, which I have. And now I can go ahead and start the process of establishing a new ride line on the inside of the shear. So I'm going to go to my 50, and actually the ride line was not that bad on this shear. Interestingly too, even though this shear is actually cut down some, the ride line should come up fairly well because it is double hollow ground on the inside, which means that there's a slightly different hollow grind in the ride area of the shear versus the actual length of the shear. So I'm going to go ahead and take a peek at this and see how that cut, and then we'll go from there. Alright, now that I've established a reasonable ride line on the shear, albeit not a perfect one, I can go ahead and start the process of doing the remainder of the sharpening on the outside of the shear. And I'm probably going to have to come back to this waterstone and then dress the waterstone before I do more work, because despite trying to make sure that I didn't get anything embedded in the stone, when I found that I did, and there was some slight scratches on the inside surface of the shear. So I'll have to deal with that after the fact. You know, oftentimes the situation that we're in can create additional work for us. So just be careful when you're actually taking on shears like this. I like to do shears like this because I consider them a challenge, but if I'm doing something like this out in the field, this would very easily be a $45 to $50 job to sharpen the scissor and correct it. You know, this keeps my skills up and helps me with being able to do repair work. And there's nothing wrong with doing it, but if you are going to do something like this, I would suggest that you do similar to what I do if I'm going to do something at my regular rate, which is just bring the shear back home, and it gives you something to play with. Just make sure that you talk to the customer before you do it too, because it may not be able to be repaired. But again, the customer is not going to be any worse off if they let you try to repair the shear, because the shear is already damaged beyond usability anyway. If you can make it usable, that's great. Just make sure that you're not wasting productive time when you're out on the road on something like this, unless you absolutely know that you can fix it. In this particular case, I took this on just to see if it could be done, and then also use it as a teaching moment for the person that sent it to me. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on with my 30 micron disc, and I'm going to start by bringing up a fine burr. Now that the burr is brought up on the edge, I'm going to start the convexing process and cleaning up the front surface of the shear from the 60 and the 80 micron, just smoothing it out, basically sanding it, and then moving on to the 15 and then a 9 before I progress back over to the waterstone again and then going to polish. Alright, I've now stepped through my 30, 15, and 9 micron, and you can see that the shear has been reconvexed on the front surface. Looks a whole lot better than it did, so we're going to rotate this around and see if we can see this. It's always hard to shoot stainless steel and actually get a good view of what the rounded edge looks like. This is in comparison to this. See if we can get them both side by side here. So you can see that I've brought down the back side of the throat, and I've done away with the thick angle that's bull-nosed on the front surface of the shear, and kind of like the lip on that top area up there, and then redressed the inside of the shear as well. The majority of the problem though with this shear was mainly on the outside. Like I said, the ride line was reasonable, although one blade is a little too thick at the tip, and the only way to really correct that would be to completely re-hollow grind the blade. But re-hollow grinding the blade is not a service that I offer. There are some people that are out there that can do that type of a service potentially for you, but I tend to shy away from it and then send that stuff off to them if I ever need that work done. So I'm going to go ahead, make a couple of quick strokes on the waterstone just to look and see where I'm at with pulling any additional burr off before I redress the stone. Because again, if there's any burr that's going to come off at this point, I want it to come off before I do this redressing. And I'm going to take the time to redress the stone and then work that ride line again to go ahead and straighten the shear out on the inside to make sure that everything is aligned properly. And I'm going to go ahead and start the polishing process after this. Alright, so now that I've redressed my stone, I'll go ahead and rework the shear one more time on the inside to make sure that I have a well-established, clean ride line on the inside of the shear. Going to come to a complete stop before I lift off. I say this in all of my videos and cannot express how important it is to do that. And we'll take a look and see how the ride line looks. That cleaned up any of the scratch surface that was on the inside. Come on, there we go. On the actual line itself, underneath still, in the hollow of the shear, there is a little bit of scratch surface, but that's not going to have any effect on the cut. So we are going to move on to the polishing process now. Alright, I've switched over to my polishing disc, and I'm going to go ahead and reclamp the shear back into the fixture. And I'm going to go ahead and start my polishing process. All the way up to full speed. I'm using 3 micron diamond paste on this felt pad. Another great polishing compound is the Super Blue compound that Alex makes. His contact information for the above shears will be below as well. He also sells products like polishing compounds and the discs with the CBN on them that we talked about, and a number of other tools for sharpeners that you may be interested in. I have always preferred the 3 micron diamond paste just because of the polish that it does. There's some that use a 3 micron diamond spray, which works well also. But I am just going through the sharpening steps now, and I'm going to make sure that I'm polishing that whole front surface of that shear and smoothing it up nicely so that I can get a smooth looking polish with very little scratch. Okay, we'll look at what I did here under some magnification. This is the magnifier that I use on my MoFat lamp. You can see that this blade is now highly polished and there's very few visible scratches that are left on the edge itself. Looks pretty good. And then on the inside you can also see that I no longer have that real hefty kind of like swoop on the back side of the throat of the shear. You can see that it's a little bit weaker in the ride area back in the back here, but that's going to be acceptable for the cut that we had to do on this. If we look at this in comparison to the other blade, you'll see a stock difference, especially in that early entry part of the shear, where it's not nearly as crisped out on that ride area right there. Let's see if we can see it this way, or the early entry area, I mean right here where it's very swooped up. And then we'll just look at that front surface of that blade, and you can really see where it's got a pretty hefty bevel, almost like a double bevel along the remainder of the blade. I wish I could get that to come in a little bit better, but like I said, that's always hard to do shooting stainless steel. But yeah, and actually, believe it or not, this blade was the one that was not quite as bad as the other one. So it's actually, we're just going to cut this down on this second blade, go through the same steps with the second blade, and then we'll be ready to put the shear back together. Alright, so now I've put the shear back together. Actually, it looks pretty good. Both blades are done. We don't have that nasty looking swoop anymore in that early entry. The second ride line actually came out pretty good, but I have to deal with these tips now because these tips are way over pointed. And we'll go ahead and knock that down. You can do this either on your flat hone, your twice as sharp, or your Okami. In this particular case, the Okami was the one that was the closest in reach. So that's what we're doing the work on. Touch that down. I'm going to round those tips out because now we've flattened them just slightly. So we want to make sure we round them so they have a nice smooth feel. Going to knock the back side of that off because you don't want it to be rough on the outer edge of what you actually just worked on. So in other words, if they're running it down their hand, you want them to be able to feel where it's not scratching the surface of the hand. So you basically have to relieve a little bit of what you rounded out on the tips. The tips look good now. The tips are crossing plenty. And we'll go ahead and do a scratch test. Not a scratch test, Jim. A cut test. Alright, so shear is back together, and the final step will be testing the shear. Cuts clean through dry tissue with very little push. Let's go ahead and wet the tissue. This way we'll check and see if there's any grab at the tip. Good clean cut all the way to the tip. Pull straight down without any grab. And now our final test is to actually cut on what the stylus will be cutting on, which is here. And we want to be able to do the cut with very little, let's see if we can get that in a little better, with very little, if any, hair slide through the cut, which this looks pretty good. Nice clean cut all the way to the tip with very little slide, if any. The hair that I'm testing on here is not the best. The majority of my hair that I have is out in the van, and that's actually some weave hair that I use for doing my testing on thinners. So anyway, the shear itself is done. It's ready to go. It actually looks really good. So I think that this is actually ready to go back to my sharpening friend for him to deliver to his customer. I'm going to give it a little bit better of a wipe down, give it one more once over, and then we'll get it shipped back to him. Alright, so just remember when you are working on a shear like this that you don't have to fix every shear that's out there. There's nothing wrong with taking a shear back and working on something if you just want to go ahead and take a crack at doing it. But don't expect yourself to be able to fix every shear that's out there. There are some shears that are just so badly damaged that they just need to be replaced. Just be willing to walk away from time to time, and or take a little bit of time to do a little more learning and find out how you can actually do full-on repairs like this. There's a newsletter that I do called On the Edge. It has different kinds of repairs from time to time, and this teaches you how to sell shears and other things. I'll leave a link below to my email, or where you can go to grab my email. You can send me an email out with the words free subscription to OTE, free subscription to OTE, and that'll get you a free subscription to that newsletter. It comes out each month, and many of the sharpeners have liked it. It goes out to about 1,800 people now. But another thing too that you may want to do at some point in time is look at doing some training. I do training online, which can be a help because you don't have to travel to me. I do in-person training as well, and there's also a number of other people that do training around the country that are very reliable, and I'll put some links to them underneath this video as well, including some information about what I do. So if there's ever any way that I can help you, please let me know. I hope that this was a help to you, and as always, thanks very much for watching. Good sharpening.